So with this, let us move on to our first panel, which will examine the central question I posed for you. Can human values drive organizational success? And for this, I call on stage a most illustrious panel comprising of leaders from business, nonprofits, and academia to examine, you got it, all three layers of the cake. So I would like to call on stage Raj Panjabi. Raj Panjabi was special advisor to President Biden and also earlier a social entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Last Mile Health. He was named, and get this, follow what I'm about to read out to you. He was named one of Time's most influential people in the world in 2016, Time's 50 most influential people in healthcare in 2018, Fortune's one of world's greatest leaders in 2015 and 2017, recipient of the 2017 TED Prize. Give a big round of applause to Raj. It's my pleasure to invite on stage Emma Seppälä, faculty of the Yale School of Management, science director of Stanford's Center for Compassion and Altruism. I love that. Best-selling author of The Happiness Track. Welcome, Emma. Professor Robert Waldinger from Harvard Medical School, director of the most famous 75-year-old longitudinal study, which I simply call the Harvard Happiness Project. He's a TED speaker with one of the 10 most watched TED Talks in history. You should watch it if you haven't yet heard it. And he's a Zen master. Rathi Murthy, president and CTO of Expedia Product and Technology, with earlier leadership roles in multiple companies, including Yahoo, eBay, Amex. And congratulations, Rathi, recent winner of the Fast Company Innovator-of-the-Year award. Our moderator is Johan Berlin, senior advisor at Leverage Philanthropy, former C-suite executive, writer, podcaster, featured in TEDx, Forbes, Harvard Business School. Give it up for Johan. Johan, take it away.
First, so nice to be here with you all, and very much looking forward to speaking with our interdisciplinary panel here. And Sanjay, such a provocative question that you asked. Can people in business flourish? Can we uphold compassion, dignity, and also have high-performing teams that excel in what really is the Darwinian business landscape? And so I'm very much looking forward to drawing on all of your insights. And Raj, I wanted to start with you. About 15 years ago, my wife and I first got involved with Art of Living's work in Haiti. We had a 10,000-person Haitian youth corps. And I remember one of the things I would always hear whenever I'd go to get advice at Wharton and other places, they would say, you really need to integrate more business into social ventures. There's so much that social ventures can learn from business. And I look at your organization, Better Mile Health, and the incredible impact that it's had, where frontline workers are literally risking their lives to go and save people, and the mission couldn't be more dire. And starting, if I got this correct, I believe you seeded it with your wedding gift, the product. So we glorify this idea of lean business, but I'm gonna flip the question around, and I'm gonna ask you, what can business learn from social ventures, and what can your very illustrious career teach them in maybe overcoming adaptive challenges, maintaining vision, or taking big risks that can have an impact in people's lives?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'll say that it was great to see so many folks who raised their hands having gone to the cultural festival last night, and I will have a chance to go there tonight with my kids and my wife, who I did get married to and launched Last Mile Health 16 years ago with. And before I was Punjabi MD, I was dancing to Punjabi MC Bhangra dancing. So there may be a surprise performance tonight if you come out. There's a deep, I want to speak about empathy and its role in transforming the world, making change either through social ventures or the business venture. And, you know, since leaving the White House last month, entering this phase of becoming a recovering public servant, I've had a chance to advise companies and investors. And often the question I get asked is, how do I get the service or the product that I've created that I know generates tremendous value for customers or clients? How do I get that to people who aren't being reached currently? The so-called last mile problem. If I'm reaching them, how do I do it more efficiently? And it turns out empathy, I've learned, has a lot to do with answering that question. After our wedding, my wife and I's wedding 16 years ago, or at it, we raised $6,000 to launch a nonprofit organization, a social venture called Last Mile Health, as you pointed out. And the entire focus of Last Mile Health was to flip the medical care model on its head. I'm a physician, as I mentioned earlier, other than being a dancer. And I had grown up in West Africa, in Liberia, came here with my family during the Civil War. We rebuilt our lives. I had a chance to go back to Liberia as a medical student at the time, just before the moment we got married. And what I found was utter destruction. There were 51 doctors left in a country of 4 million people. So for those who may, those numbers are big numbers. To put it in perspective, it'd be like the entire city that we're sitting in now, Washington, D.C., having just about 8 or 10 doctors. So if you got sick in the city where those few doctors remained in Liberia, you may stand a chance. But if you got sick in rural, remote communities where doctors didn't reach, you'd often die from conditions no one should die from in the 21st century. Complications of childbirth, tuberculosis, malaria. And we wanted to bring care to people, not wait for people to come to care. And our answer came from within those communities themselves. The World Health Organization predicts by 2030 there will be an 18 million health worker shortfall in the world. That's in the United States and around the world. And so we asked, what if the community itself could be part of solving that problem? What if folks could become part of the medical care team, even if they don't have a medical degree? What if we could hire, train, and equip people who may not have even finished high school to extend the reach of the medical team? And that's exactly what we set out to do. Women like Serena, who had only reached the 10th grade but had a passion to serve her people, were trained in weeks on the 30 most basic medical skills, supervised by a nurse, given a smartphone to help train them and continue to help them do their work. Medical products that could fit in your pocket, like a $1 rapid test kit for malaria, which was affecting her community, and medicines in a backpack so she could go door to door to serve her neighbors. That has gone from about 30 workers in one village 16 years ago to thousands of workers serving millions of people across Africa and in many parts of the United States using that same approach. And what I've learned is that this basic notion that we all have as humans to answer the call to serve your neighbor is something that's actually quite universal in our history. And it's something, if we come back to in this moment, in business or in social ventures, some extraordinary things can happen. And we know this because during the Ebola outbreak, history's worst Ebola outbreak, which happened in Liberia, some of you will remember about a decade ago, It was these workers, when there were about 1 million people who would become infected, and most of them were said that they were going to die from this disease, and the disease had already reached the United States and other parts of the world. It was these workers who went door to door to answer the call to serve their neighbor. They learned the symptoms and signs of Ebola. They got people into care and helped bring that virus under control. In fact, hunted it down and stopped it in its tracks. And during the COVID pandemic, when I was serving as President Biden's advisor at the National Security Council on COVID and also on other infectious diseases, I saw that same approach, whether it's in vaccinating people in barbershops in Maryland, taking vaccines to 2 billion vaccinations in India on rickshaws and other ways, bringing care to people was vital to helping stop pandemics. And I think certainly the next one. So what is the practical lesson for business? I think it's this. If we can find a way with our toughest problems to look beyond the walls of our offices, or your home office if you're remote, and go meet people where they are, and invest in the people closest to the problem, that place you're trying to deliver a service more effectively or a product where it hasn't reached. Invest in those people and value not just their expertise as it might be quantified by a professional degree, but value their lived experience and the wisdom that that brings. To have empathy for their lives. I think you can see some amazing things happen. If you're delivering a service practically, that might mean staffing and training people in the local community or the customer, the area you're trying to reach, the neighbors of the customers to deliver the service. If you're trying to deliver a product, it might mean not just investing in the product, but investing in the people around it to train them to deliver the product more efficiently and create career paths for them. So I think that is the way, to me, empathy can be part of that amazing, delicious cake that my friend Sanjay just spoke about, the mousse, yes, and how we might go about operationalizing it in our ventures.
Yes. I love this idea of trusting people closest to the problem, but I also see there's so much inherent dignity by appreciating the tacit knowledge that exists in those communities and really honoring that and allowing them to be part of the solution. So very, very beautiful approach. Emma, I know you're one of the leading voices on this, human-centered leadership, leading with compassion. HBR every month reposts this article that Emma wrote. So it must be very popular around being more compassionate in business. But I also know that you have to go and speak to very tough boards and in all kinds of corporate cultures from all over the world who may have an aspiration of this, but it may be very challenging. And what do you tell them? How do you sort of make the case for more human-centered leadership, for more compassionate leadership?
Well, I think, sorry. Well, I always just say look at the data. Because if you look at the data, there's an area of organizational scholarship called positive organizational leadership, and what the results speak for themselves. Leaders who lead with more human values, with more kindness, compassion, humility, forgiveness, they do better, their employees are more loyal, more engaged, there's better customer service, there's a higher bottom line, there's greater shareholder returns. I mean, the list goes on. What's interesting is that a lot of businesses don't know about this data yet. And yet it is the leadership of the future because organizations who lead in this way, who have this kind of culture, do better. And it's also what Gen Z wants. Gen Z doesn't want a toxic corporate culture. They want the human values. They want it in the products they buy, but they also want it in the organizations they work for. But to bring this down to really practical level, I'm going to share how my colleague Kim Cameron sort of dove into this research. He's one of the founding sort of fathers of this field. He was looking at organizations as these sort of large networks of people, and he saw, gosh, within these organizations, there's these subgroups that are super productive. Like, what is going on there? And I remember Kim telling me, you know, Emma, it's kind of embarrassing as an academic to say this, but all I can say about these subgroups is there's an individual in the middle of it that has this positive energy. And so he went further into researching this, and what did it mean? It was individuals who led with human values, who were kind, compassionate, empathic, all those things. And it led to this massive productivity. So again, let's bring it down to what's really concrete. I want you to think about in your life whether you've had a mentor, either as a child, a young adult, or in your professional life, who was there for you and who saw the best in you and either mentored you or encouraged you or just had your back. I hope you can all think of at least one person in your life who was there for you in that way. Now, if that person right now texted you and said, I have an emergency, can you please call me? Would you drop everything, even this glorious conference, and go out and call them? Yes, right? That is loyalty. Now I want you to think back, how do organizations usually try to get loyalty? Pay people more money, right? More perks? But that means that the organization next door who pays more can buy their loyalty. That's not loyalty, do you see that? Loyalty is that human moment with another person, that moment of empathy or inspiration that we just had listening to you, with someone who had your back, who cared for you, and you will forever be loyal to them and inspired by them. And they've enlivened you and they've inspired you. So that's just bringing it down. We've all had that experience, and that's kind of the core of what positive leadership is, in sum.
Wonderful. I could feel the elevation in the room when you asked this question. Think of somebody who's been there for you. And you really can sense that. Just because I know we're a predisposed audience based on the poll that Sanjay took, I'll play a bit of a contrarian. And Rathi, I know you've been a part of a number of very complex turnarounds. Turnarounds are incredibly difficult, as those of you from the business community would know. A lot of time there's finger pointing. Shareholders have sort of lost trust in the company. They can become very toxic. And yet you've managed to lead and excel in those environments and are known as somebody who really cares about their people, but also cares about performance. It gets the job done. How have you balanced that tension?
A lot of coffee, maybe. No, I think, first of all, thank you for sharing such amazing thoughts. It's a good reminder for all of us in the corporate sector. I have been pretty much all my career life leading large-scale transformations, using technology to drive business value. And one thing I remind myself is we're trying, even at Expedia, we're trying to solve a very difficult problem that's never been solved before. So really changing not just Expedia, but changing the travel industry. And when you're trying to do something that's never been done before, it takes a lot of courage, grit, perseverance, and you have to allow forgiveness for yourself and everyone who works with you, because no one knows the path. It's never a clear-cut playbook that you're running by. So it's something you have to allow for yourself to pivot through. And like you said, Raj, it's really getting down and listening to the people, knowing what's working, what's not working, and constantly pivoting to that. That's one. I would also say the second biggest thing for me that's worked when you talk about finger pointing and politics, I think that exists everywhere. When there's more than two people, I think it exists. But the approach I've taken is usually the intent. My intent is to make the company successful, and a large part of making the company successful is making the people successful. It's really not driven. I've never been motivated by titles myself or my going up the career ladder. So that helps a lot in making sure the actions we do or the path we take is very focused on the right thing. It doesn't have to be the easiest thing, but it's the right thing to do for the company and the shareholders, and also allows you the freedom to be transparent about what's working, what's not working. So that usually has allowed me to enroll my partners, in my business partners, in being part of my journey, helping me versus trying to stab me or throw me down. And that's very useful. Try not to be precious about always being perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good is something I always tell everybody. I think the third piece is all transformation is people, process, technology, I think. And the hardest part of this three is people. And they are the keys to the castle. So bringing people along is a very core part of driving a transformation. I find that whenever you're transforming, you can't be nice all the time. It's not about being nice, it's about being kind. I think leading and driving difficult decisions, you're always either looking for efficiencies, reduction in workforce, or moving everybody's cheese, like completely changing what they're doing, the tools they're working with, the technology they're working with, evolving them to the next up-and-coming technology, which is not comfortable. You're really taking away what they were used to, what they were confident with, and you're changing everything. But that is usually what's required to drive success. So I always say it takes grit, courage, and kindness, listening to them and taking them there, knowing that this is the right thing to do for not just the company, but for them. If we don't disrupt ourselves, you will be disrupted by someone else. So doing it with that compassion and being there for them is essential. Last thing I will say is we've got to be able to drive all of this, lead by example. You have to be that safety net that enables everyone to be fearless in order to innovate and really take that leap of faith and try something that's never been done before. So being vulnerable sometimes and, saying, look, on a very good day, I'm 60% right. And I consider that an awesome day. So we acknowledging that it's okay to be wrong, it's okay to not get everything right, gives them the freedom also to try things that are big and scary and takes courage and move forward.
Wow. So many beautiful embodied lessons there. I mean, awareness that everything is changing, that it will move through, things move at the speed of trust and belonging. And then that commitment, that intention, and room for imperfection. So yeah, so many beautiful motifs and a remarkable job. Professor Waldinger, I think I shared with you when we were talking earlier that right at my high school, 20-year high school reunion, I posted your talk. So it's a pleasure to be here with you, and the insights from your study are amazing. And so often in business, we're obsessed with the newest shiny trends, right? And but very rarely do we have an opportunity to look at longitudinal data, like the 75-year-old study you've been around what brings meaning and also decline in people's happiness and health. And I sit on the board of one of Gurudev's organizations, TLEX Institute, and one of the studies we often cite is how disengaged employees are at work, in spite of spending tremendous amounts of money on this. And what can your study teach us, or teach the business leaders in the room and the nonprofit leaders in the room or from the public sector about what really matters to people at an innate level, at a human level, at an affective level?
Okay, well, it's such an honor to be here, and so heartening to be with people who want to talk about human values in the world of commerce. I mean, this is amazing. And, and people who talk about cake at 10 o'clock in the morning, that's pretty good too. So let me just say a bit about what this study is that I've been directing now for a couple of decades. It's the longest study of human life that's ever been done. It began in 1938 with 724 people, now 724 families, studied over 85 years, both really poor, underserved, underprivileged families, and privileged Harvard undergraduates, including John F. Kennedy, Ben Bradley. But the studies were about what allows people to thrive as we watch them go through their entire lives. And the most surprising finding that kept emerging was this finding that human connection was essential, not just to keeping us happy. So we found that, yes, the people who had the warmest, happiest relationships stayed happy throughout their lives, but that's not a surprise. What was surprising is that those people lived longer and stayed free of physical disability longer than people who had fewer relationships and less happy relationships. And so for the last 10 years in my laboratory, we've been looking at the mechanisms by which relationships actually get into our bodies and predict, like, why you're less likely to get coronary artery disease or type 2 diabetes or arthritis if you have warmer connections. So then the question is, how does this apply to all of you? Well, certainly in our private lives, it matters. But we find that it matters tremendously in the working world. So, like Emma, I work in data, so I'm going to bring in some data. Many of you know about the Gallup organization that did a survey of 15 million workers around the world at all levels of organizations. And one of their main questions was, do you have a best friend at work? And what that meant was, do you have someone at work to whom you can talk about anything personal in your life? So, 30% of those 15 million workers said they had a friend at work. Now, those 30%, as evaluated by themselves, but also by their supervisors, by their coworkers, they were happier, they were better at customer-facing tasks, they were more productive, and they were less likely to leave the workplace for other jobs. And those 70% who said they did not have a friend at work, 11 out of 12 of those 70% said they were pretty disengaged in their work. They were not engaged. So what we know is that there's tremendous bottom line benefit. You all know this, that's why you're here today. But it's counterintuitive. Many leaders imagine, oh, if people have friends at work, then they're chatting, they're not doing their jobs, right? They're wasting time. It turns out it is just the opposite, and that leaders, at their peril, ignore these facts. Some of you know Arthur Blank, who was the founder of Home Depot. He's the owner of the Atlanta Falcons, has been very invested in value-driven companies. And he asks his employees, he calls them associates, he asks the question, is this company worth your life? And because if you think about it, most of our lives, for many of us, are spent in the working world. And so he asks, is this worth spending your life here? And he argues that we need to make it worth people's lives, to spend their lives with us, right? And I think what we find, first of all, we find in this 85-year study that the people who are the best at this are simply the people who prioritize connections, relationships. And that means taking small steps every day with friends, with coworkers, with family to stay connected. And what we know is that from good research from Harvard Business School, the Sloan School, many other sources of data, that we can create these opportunities for human connection in the workplace. But that, as people have been saying, it can't simply come from the human resources professionals. It has to come from leadership. Leaders have to make it clear that they value this by example, and they need to make it clear that they value bringing the personal into the workplace, allowing themselves to be vulnerable. All of those qualities that, we used to think that the self-made man would never do. And there are always men who talk about being self-made, right? This fiction. But I think what I can say from essentially watching lives play out through entire lifetimes and across generations is that these human values are essential, not just for happiness, not just for physical health, but for having lives that are productive and that we feel have meaning. And they're the only lives we have.
Beautiful, beautiful. We have a couple minutes left. So Emma, I know when we first met, and I know we have a lot of nonprofit government leaders in the room, so I want to weave that way a little bit. We first met when you were doing research around the Art of Living Foundation to work with veterans and helping them use physiological techniques and different interventions that build social connection and belonging, which Professor Waldinger just really highlighted, I think, underlined the importance of that. What have you learned from interventions that go into the workplace, that also go and with the VA or government institutions? What have you seen with different restorative techniques, different belonging techniques that you've seen that works really well?
Well, it's a really interesting question, especially with regards to the whole mental health issues that we are hearing about so much in the workplaces. We know that when people experience stress or negative emotions, they become more self-focused. And you can think about it evolutionarily speaking, it's probably a good idea that if you were in some kind of physical danger, you focus on yourself and save your life. But the problem is that when stress is really high and there's a lot of negative emotion, we tend to feel more self-focused more of the time, and so we connect less. And in so doing, there's all these repercussions. And so, and as you were saying, the leadership has to model the values and exemplify them. And so that is why it's so important, especially for leaders, to learn how to manage their own state of mind, to learn how to be calmer. We know from a neuroscience perspective that when you have a leader, you observe them much more and are much more focused on them than a leader is focused on their employees. If you think about a time when you might have gone in to ask for a raise or ask for money or whatever it was, that when you walk in, you're scrutinizing the person's face, you're very attentive to them. And it might not be the same for people that work for you. But what happens is that, and you've probably experienced this, that you walk into one of those meetings, and you've been preparing for it, and you're ready, you're on your game, and you go up to the person, and they're like, oh, hi, and they're listening to you, and they're looking at their phone, and they're looking around the room, and they're not present with you, right? How many people have experienced that? How does it feel, right? They're not present, and that's, I think, one of the main issues is that we're so bombarded with things. Leaders are also so busy in their mind that they forget to be present, and when you're not present, then you lose people. And we also know when you look at the research on charisma that people who are the most charismatic are actually people, they don't have a special gift, they're just really present. They're empathic, they listen, they're with the other person 100%, they support them, they see their best self. So going back to the practices, I mean, the research that we've conducted on sky breath meditation, with veterans of trauma, but also with different leaders, with students, is just that it's a very efficient way to, in a time when things are busy, when things are moving fast, when we need things to work well and efficiently, using a technique like sky breath meditation, which is using your breath, can really help you to come back to that sort of more settled state of mind quickly.
Wonderful. Rathi, with the time we have left, I'd love to talk with you because you're really at the intersection of this, leading big transformation work in complex environments. And I remember whenever we first met, you were working for one of America's stalwart blue chip companies. And this is, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, and you really took a risk to take a more human-centered approach. Back when you met with board members or EVPs or CEOs, they would sort of roll their eyes at this conversation, like this is, shareholder, Milton Friedman, shareholder values, all that matters was very much the zeitgeist. And I really think of you as an entrepreneur who I admire very much. And so how have you taken those risks? How have you built influence or been able to sort of insert these approaches, even whenever it may seem like a risk at the time, and you have so many other priorities?
That was such a good question. I think they answered it so well. So look, yes, I met you when I was working for one of a large financial companies, and the core problem, like I said before, transformation, a big part of transformation is people. And one of the biggest problems the company was facing was lack of trust and way too much stress. And there was a lot of turnover of workforce. Leadership was not really empowering the team. So there was a lot of impact, that the baggage that the teams were carrying. And you cannot transform just with technology. You have to address the core problem. And that's when I reached out to TLEX, and I said, there is a need to help give the teams tools to address the core problem, which is stress, and start feeling better with themselves, to enable them to discover new capabilities and perform better and feel better. I think you said it so well. Everybody asks for, do you have a friend? And when you trust no one, you have no friend, and you have no affinity to either the company or the boss or yourself, actually. And so when we did TLEX, we started with a small group. It was just me having to empower a small budget, start with a small group of people, and thank you for helping me. But it was incredible. In just a matter of 6 weeks, the pulse scores, employee pulse scores, went off the charts. So something that was in the 20s, because no one trusted anybody, went to 70s. And it was just an incredible unlock. And that's when I kept going through. And I think that enabled me to have a proof point, which I played through in every company. And I went further, especially post-COVID. What happened is you're not at work, you're hybrid. How do you build that connection? There's a lot of anxiety. There's more anxiety than before. And as a woman leader, I will say we worked for decades to get more women to dream bigger, aspire to take on more leadership roles, and we've made steps towards it. But after COVID, it's actually gone backwards, because women are taking a bigger brunt of taking care of the family, working from home, cooking more. There's just a lot more burden on female leaders that they are having to cope with. That's when we rolled out. I was at Yahoo, Verizon Media, and we said we'll roll out to 10,000 employees and start with the C-suite. And Christoph, thank you for helping us. But when you exemplify as a leader, we'll start contentious meetings with a short meditation, and you calm down. It becomes a practice that everybody embodies, and I cannot tell you how that became actually a competitive advantage. Everybody said, I want to work there because they care for us, and not just productivity, they actually care for us. And then productivity goes up too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I think one of the common motifs is really this embodied wisdom and leadership that all of you represent. And modeling and taking risks. I see so many other people. Louis, who was C-suite at Amazon, took a big risk, bringing us in. Taking those risks to uplift human dignity. And let's close with one panel, 1 minute reflections from each of the panelists. So maybe we can start with you, Dr. Seppälä, and then work our way this way.
Well, I think this is clearly the future when you look at the data. This is how the organizations that are going to survive in the future are going to be leading, with empathy, with compassion, with mindfulness, with caring for one another, because we have the same needs, whether we're in the business or in a work environment, to belong to one another. And I think that's what the theme is of the World Culture Festival. So, yeah, it's an important one.
You know, I think empathy and values-based leadership starts from the top. And so one thing I would encourage, because everyone raised their hands that they love 3-layered cakes and mousse earlier, but raise their hands when Sanjay asked, do you think this is relevant to business, human values, is to go back after this weekend and see if we can challenge ourselves to create more space for that type of conversation in our companies. Because I think some of us can feel doubtful about whether our employees will respond to that. And one way to perhaps do that is to spend more time telling employees that it's okay not to have all the answers, that the employees more than their biggest mistake, that investing in the mission actually requires investing in the people. I think going back with that attitude is one approach. The other I found useful in my own practice as a leader is gratitude, which I actually think has one of the highest underestimated returns on investment, is expressing gratitude in specific ways to our coworkers. So I would leave it there, but I think finding ways to engender humility, it's okay not to have all the answers, and finding ways to express gratitude are perhaps two things I'll try to take from this weekend back to my workplace, and I hope others can find their one or two things to take back.
Well, perhaps the only thing I can add to all this wisdom is that, we're talking about great big ideas, and it can give you the impression that these are Herculean tasks. They are not. So think about small actions that you can take over and over again. So today, if you don't want to send a text or an email right now to one of your colleagues saying, I'd love to have a conversation about a different way of doing things at our company, send it on Monday, right, at 8 a.m. But think about small things you can do, small connections, small conversations that could start things rolling. Don't go away thinking that this has to be an enormous initiative that'll take billions of dollars and 10 years to complete, okay? Try something small today, tomorrow, Monday. Thank you.
I'll also add from the corporate hat, many corporate leaders think that being competitive and progressing or ambitious in your career conflicts with also being a meditator and practicing things that may appear to be slowing you down. These are not conflicting attributes. Actually, one supports the other. So embrace that, and I think you'll go far.
Beautiful. Well, let's give a warm round of applause for all of our panelists. And so nice to be here with all of you today. We hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.